18 years building every system that kept the company running, and all I got was a cold email. Your position is being eliminated. The betrayal came dressed up as restructuring, but I knew it was corporate greed, trading my salary for 3 cheap junior hires. They thought I was too expensive after 2 decades of loyalty, without realizing the real cost of injustice. What my boss didn't know was that when the crashes started 3 days later, his desperate calls became the sweetest revenge. My name is Marcus Thompson. I'm 42 years old, and for 15 straight years, I was the senior architect at Meridian Construction here in Austin, Texas. I'd wake up religiously at 6 a.m., drink my black coffee, review ongoing projects, and arrive at the office before 7:30 sharp. The company grew exponentially under my technical leadership. Our bank account was steady, and I truly believed in the fairness of hard, honest work. My mornings followed a sacred routine I had perfected over the years, checking progress on every job site, coordinating field teams. It was a symphony I had conducted for over a decade, each note tuned to deliver projects on time and keep our finances healthy. But over the past 2 months, something had shifted, and I had no idea a brutal betrayal was already being planned behind my back. David Chen had come on board as the new COO 3 months earlier, with a Stanford MBA and a smooth pitch about resource optimization. Young, ambitious, fluent in the kind of corporate jargon that impressed investors, he quickly won over the board of directors. What I didn't realize was that every question he asked had a very specific purpose: to prepare my dismissal and dismantle everything I had built for my family. The signs grew stronger when I found out I was no longer being included in new client presentations, something that had been solely my responsibility for years. Contracts I had personally negotiated were being handed off to other departments. My technical specs were being changed without any input from me. I was about to learn that loyalty isn't always a two-way street in the corporate world, and betrayal often comes from the last place you'd expect. The first truly suspicious meeting happened on a humid Thursday in April, when David called me in for a strategic review of responsibilities. For a full hour, I was hit with questions about documentation, knowledge transfer, and operational sustainability without individual dependency. David smiled and typed furiously on his laptop. I had just handed him everything he needed to justify my termination, without even knowing it. The atmosphere at work grew heavy. Coworkers started avoiding long conversations. Big decisions were being made in meetings I was now routinely excluded from. I could feel betrayal forming behind the scenes, but my trusting nature kept me from imagining how deep the conspiracy actually ran. The irony was brutal. The more essential I became, the more David saw me as an expensive obstacle to the company's bottom line. Jennifer noticed I was more distant at family meals, withdrawn on weekends, carrying an invisible weight that grew heavier every day. When my wife asked about work, I'd just say, "Everything's under control." But my eyes told a different story. I believed that technical skill and fairness were shields against any storm, and I was about to find out just how wrong I was about the revenge coming my way. The final week before the collapse was filled with artificial calm, like the stillness before a devastating earthquake. David was unusually friendly, greeting me in the elevators with smiles that never reached his eyes, casually asking about personal projects and family plans. I had no idea that while I kept the company running smoothly, David had already convinced the board that I was a needless luxury, and that my firing would be just the opening move in a chain of events that would change everything. On Monday, May 15th at 9:47 a.m., I got an email from Human Resources with the subject line, "Urgent meeting, conference room B." It wasn't from David or even my direct supervisor. It came straight from HR, asking for my immediate presence to discuss an important matter regarding restructuring. My bank account was solid, my family safe, and I had no reason to suspect my life was about to completely fall apart. When I walked into the room, David was there with 2 HR reps I barely knew, all of them wearing that cold, professional look. A manila folder sat on the table, and I already knew this wasn't good news. Nobody schedules urgent meetings to hand out promotions or praise. The betrayal I'd been sensing for months had finally taken shape, and I was about to find out just how deep it really went. Marcus, due to an organizational restructuring focused on cost optimization, your position as senior architect is being eliminated, David said, straight to the point. The words came out of his mouth with the coldness of someone reading a financial report. Not a hint of humanity, not a shred of recognition for the 15 years I had given. My firing was delivered like a line item on a spreadsheet, cut to boost the next quarter's profit. They slid the folder toward me. Inside was the severance package, 3 months' pay and immediate termination of all company benefits. David explained that 3 junior engineers would take over my responsibilities more efficiently and cost-effectively, as if 15 years of experience could just be swapped out. I didn't yell or lash out, but inside a quiet rage began to build, fueled by the injustice of that corporate betrayal. You have until the end of the day to collect your personal items and return all company equipment, the HR rep continued, reading from a clearly memorized script. My wife had no idea. My family had no clue that our financial stability had just been gutted by a decision made in meetings I wasn't even invited to. The fairness I once believed existed in the corporate world had revealed itself as a cruel and calculated illusion. I signed the papers in silence. No questions, no negotiation, no begging for a second chance I knew would never come. David watched my every move, probably hoping for an emotional outburst he could use against me later. But I kept it professional. I responded with just 2 words. Understood. But inside, I was already building a mental list of everything they didn't know about the systems I had designed. I packed up my personal items into a cardboard box, ignoring the awkward glances from coworkers as I walked down the hallway. 15 years of loyalty, innovation, and unwavering dedication, reduced to a small box I carried to my car under the blazing Texas sun. The irony was bitter. They thought they were cutting a needless cost, but I knew they had just made the biggest strategic mistake in the company's history. I drove home in silence, the box riding shotgun, and a strange calm settling over me, like an internal storm had finally passed. It wasn't anger, it wasn't despair. It was a crystal-clear sense of what needed to be done next. They had chosen betrayal and injustice. Now they were about to learn that some revenge doesn't even need to be planned. Sometimes the incompetence of the traitors handles the justice for you. I got home at 11:30 a.m., something that hadn't happened in 15 years, carrying a cardboard box and a weight on my chest that seemed to grow with every breath. Jennifer was in the kitchen making lunch when she saw me walk through the front door in the middle of the day, and the confusion on her face quickly turned into concern. "They fired me," I said bluntly, placing the box on the floor and sinking heavily into the living room chair. The silence that followed was deafening, like the whole world had stopped to process the betrayal that had just happened. My wife came closer, her eyes searching mine for some kind of explanation that could make sense, but I was still trying to understand how 15 years of dedication could be tossed aside in a 20-minute meeting. We had enough savings to last a few months, but then what? How would we explain to the kids that Daddy didn't have a job anymore? I spent the rest of the afternoon in my home office, staring at the computer screen without really seeing anything, my mind spinning in circles trying to process what had just happened. The injustice burned inside like acid, not just because of the firing itself, but because of how cold and calculated it was. David had orchestrated everything with surgical precision, cutting my career like a tumor, for the financial health of the company. Jennifer brought me coffee and sat beside me, her hand finding mine in a silent gesture of support that almost made me break down. "What are we going to do now?" she asked softly, and I could feel the real worry behind her calm voice. I didn't have an answer yet, but one thing was becoming clear. They had no idea what they had just done, and I was starting to realize that maybe this firing was the biggest strategic mistake in Meridian's history. That night was long and filled with thoughts that refused to settle, my mind bouncing between rage over the betrayal and a strange sense of relief that I no longer had to pretend everything was okay. I opened my laptop and began making a mental list, all the critical systems I had developed, all the processes only I fully understood, all the passwords and protocols that lived in my head. It wasn't about revenge yet. It was about understanding exactly what they had lost when they decided I was expendable. The next morning, I woke up with a mental clarity I hadn't felt in months, as if the emotional storm from the night before had washed away the confusion and left only the facts. My family needed stability, our bank account needed a reset, and I needed a fresh start. But before any of that, I needed to understand exactly what David and Meridian had done. I grabbed my phone and started making a list. Not a list of revenge, a list of technical realities they were about to discover the hard way. The first item on the list was simple: automatic backup systems, configuration known only to me. The second, custom security protocols, incomplete documentation. The third, critical vendor integrations, passwords and contacts stored in my personal account. With every new item, one truth became increasingly clear. They hadn't just fired an expensive employee, they had removed the technical brain of the entire operation. 3 days after the firing, my phone rang for the first time. It was Alan, one of the junior engineers who had worked under me for the past 2 years. "Marcus, we need help," he said, voice tight. "The main backup system failed last night and no one can recover the Westbrook project data." I listened in silence, part of me feeling sorry for the co-workers left behind to deal with the chaos, another part knowing that sometimes justice comes in ways we never plan. Alan told me more than he should have during that desperate phone call, revealing that my firing wasn't just about cutting costs. David had presented a technology modernization plan to the board, which included replacing senior staff with a younger team. What he didn't share was that he was planning to sell the company in 6 months, and my exit was just the first step in a much bigger betrayal. 2 weeks later, Sarah Mitchell from finance called me nervously, speaking in a low voice like someone might be listening. She said David had instructed the department to prepare optimized reports for potential buyers. "Marcus, they're dressing up the numbers and using your departure as proof they can cut 40% of costs without impacting productivity." The injustice hit hard when I realized my termination was being used to build a fake narrative and inflate the company's sale value. David was using my 15-year track record as proof the systems would run fine without me, fully knowing that wasn't true. This wasn't about me versus David anymore. It was corporate fraud affecting dozens of employees and clients, including my own family. Alan called me again, panicking because the system had failed for the 3rd time in a week. During our call, he mentioned that David had promised the board the transition would be seamless through the end of the quarter. That's when it hit me. David was betting the company's future on convincing me to come back as a consultant after the sale. Sarah sent me documents that had accidentally landed on her desk, including projections showing $1.2 million in yearly savings from senior staff restructuring. The most shocking piece was a memo where David referred to experienced employees like me as depreciated assets to be liquidated before transfer. This wasn't personal anymore. It was systematic. He was creating a playbook to eliminate anyone who might question his fraudulent practices. 3 weeks after I left Meridian, Devlin Systems offered me a position after hearing I was back on the market. During the interview, their CEO showed me a report mentioning rumors that Meridian was being prepped for sale using inflated metrics. That's when I realized David wasn't just betraying me. He was deceiving buyers with falsified data, crossing into federal commercial fraud territory. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It had become a matter of justice for everyone. Employees who were next in line to be fired, clients who would lose proper support. Jennifer noticed when I started organizing everything carefully, archiving emails, recording phone calls. "This isn't about you anymore. It's about doing the right thing," she said. And I knew she was right. The scope was far bigger than I had imagined. When Alan called me a 4th time, in tears, because the system crashed during a live demo for Westbrook Properties, I saw the full picture. David had created technical failures on purpose to justify modernization costs that the buyer would cover after the sale, boosting the transaction value. Our bank account was safe thanks to Devlin, but dozens of families were about to be crushed by a corporate betrayal much bigger than one termination. 3 months after my firing, With all the evidence organized and documented, I called the law firm Phillips & Cohen in Washington. They specialize in corporate fraud and whistleblower cases. Exactly what I needed to expose David and protect the employees at Meridian. This wasn't about personal revenge anymore. It was about justice for everyone being hurt by a criminal scheme that went far beyond my termination. Attorney Mark Stevens reviewed my documentation for 2 weeks and confirmed we had a solid case of federal corporate fraud. The evidence included emails from David directing the manipulation of financial reports and documents, proving the artificial inflation of productivity metrics for the sale. Marcus, this isn't just a wrongful termination. This is federal-level fraud, he said. We're notifying both the FBI and the SEC for a full investigation. While the legal team prepared the formal complaint, I got a desperate call from Alan saying the main system had completely crashed during a critical client presentation. Westbrook Properties, which made up 30% of Meridian's revenue, was threatening to cancel their contract due to constant system failures. David offered me $200,000 to return as an emergency consultant, but I knew taking the offer would interfere with the federal investigation that was about to begin. The following Monday, FBI agents showed up at Meridian's headquarters with search and seizure warrants for all computers and financial documents. David was escorted out of the building in handcuffs, and the SEC froze all corporate bank accounts linked to the fraudulent sale. The betrayal he had orchestrated against me and dozens of employees was finally being exposed, and federal justice was taking its natural course. Sarah Mitchell, who had provided the initial evidence, was placed under witness protection after receiving threats from David. The FBI uncovered that the scheme involved not just Meridian, but a network of companies David used to launder money from inflated contracts. My wife Jennifer watched the entire process unfold on the news, proud that I had chosen the right path instead of going after petty personal revenge. 2 weeks later, Devlin Systems received an official offer to acquire Meridian's assets for a fraction of its original valuation. As Devlin's senior architect, I was assigned to lead the integration of Meridian Systems and the employees who remained after the scandal. The irony was sharp. David had fired me to cut costs, but his crimes led to a forced sale of the company, one I was now helping to rebuild under new leadership. The court case revealed that David had embezzled over $3 million through fake contracts and rigged public bids. He was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison and ordered to fully repay the stolen funds, along with fines totaling $8 million. The employees who were wrongfully terminated, including myself, received substantial compensation through the whistleblower lawsuit. Our family finally had the financial security David had tried to destroy. 6 months after the investigation began, the new Meridian, now under Devlin's management, was running better than ever, with fully documented systems and transparent processes. I received a thank you letter from the Department of Justice recognizing my courage in exposing corporate fraud that harmed not just employees, but clients and investors too. The sweetest revenge wasn't seeing David behind bars. It was knowing that dozens of families kept their jobs, and that integrity was restored to a company I helped build. 3 weeks after David's arrest, I got a call from a number I recognized as a federal prison line. It was David, trying to convince me to accept a partnership offer. He'd give me information on other schemes in exchange for a recommendation letter to reduce his sentence. I replied with just 3 words: "Don't call me." Then I hung up and blocked the number immediately, knowing that kind of betrayal didn't even deserve a conversation. David's former assistant, Monica, messaged me on LinkedIn apologizing for not realizing what was happening and begging me to help her get a position at Devlin Systems. She claimed she was also a victim of David's manipulation and needed to support her family after losing her job at Meridian. I didn't reply. Some people choose to be complicit in injustice for convenience, and the consequences of those choices are not my responsibility. A week later, Alan called me crying, saying he had lost his house because he couldn't find another job after the Meridian scandal. He begged me to refer him for a position at Devlin, promising he'd do things differently this time, and that he had learned his lesson about loyalty. I listened silently and said, "Alan, you had the chance to do the right thing when David was planning to fire me, and you chose to stay quiet." Then I hung up, knowing that sometimes justice means letting people face the consequences of their own choices. 2 months into the legal proceedings, I got an email from Graham Mitchell, the former CTO who was fired alongside David for being part of the scheme. It was 3 pages long, explaining how he didn't know the full extent of the fraud and asking to meet and clear the air between us. I deleted the email before finishing it. There were no misunderstandings, just people who chose betrayal and dishonesty, now facing the fallout without my help or forgiveness. 3 months later, David's wife, Rebecca, showed up at my office at Devlin, begging me to withdraw the charges because the kids are suffering from their father's imprisonment. She cried for 20 minutes, explaining how their bank accounts had been frozen and they were about to lose their home. I listened silently and said, "Rebecca, your husband destroyed dozens of families with his crimes. The consequences you're facing are the result of his choices, not mine." Then I asked security to escort her out. The old Meridian board tried to sue me for interfering with company business, claiming my whistleblower complaint caused unnecessary harm to innocent shareholders. They offered a $2 million settlement for me to drop all charges and let the company recover in peace. My lawyer responded with a single sentence: "My client doesn't negotiate with accomplices to corporate fraud." We countersued for witness intimidation and won an additional $500,000 in damages. 6 months after the scandal, David's daughter, who attended the same university as my oldest son, tried to approach him, apologizing on behalf of the family. She said she had no idea about her father's crimes and begged for there to be no war between families over one man's mistakes. My son told me about the meeting and I said, "Son, we're not at war with anyone. We just have nothing in common with people who chose to live dishonestly, no matter who they're related to." A year later, when the new Meridian under Devlin's leadership was running perfectly, I received a handwritten letter from David in federal prison. It was 5 pages long, where he took full responsibility for his crimes and asked for my spiritual guidance to become a better person during his sentence. I didn't read the whole letter, just skimmed the first few lines, smiled wryly, and threw it in the trash. Some people only learn the value of integrity after they've lost everything by living without it. 2 years after it all began, I'm sitting in my new office as Vice President of Engineering at Devlin Systems, looking out over the city of Austin, the place that gave me a second chance. Our bank account is healthier than it's ever been. My family is safe and strong, and I finally understood that sometimes justice arrives in ways we never see coming. David's betrayal didn't break me. It freed me from a company that never deserved my loyalty and led me to a place where my experience is truly valued. Jennifer is happier than I've seen her in years. Not just because we're financially stable, but because she sees I've finally made peace with everything that happened. Our kids don't know all the details, but they know that Daddy did the right thing when things got hard. And that's a lesson worth more than any bank balance. My wife told me yesterday, "You didn't get revenge on David. You saved yourself from becoming like him." And I knew she was absolutely right about the difference between justice and vengeance. Devlin Systems grew by 40% over the past year, largely because of the contracts we took over from the old Meridian and the reputation for integrity we've built in the market. We hired 15 former Meridian employees who had lost their jobs because of David's scheme, giving them a second chance at a company that values honesty. It wasn't revenge against David that made that success possible. It was the decision to build something better instead of just tearing down what was broken. Last week, I got a call from the federal prosecutor's office letting me know David had been transferred to a minimum security facility after showing good behavior during his first 2 years. They asked if I had any objection to the move, and I said no. His punishment was in the hands of federal justice, not mine. The real revenge wasn't seeing him suffer behind bars. It was knowing I had built a better life while he destroyed his out of greed and dishonesty. Alan sent me a Christmas card last month, saying he'd finally landed a job at a small engineering firm in Dallas. He wrote that he had learned valuable lessons about integrity and hoped that one day we could rebuild our professional friendship. I didn't respond. Some bridges are burned permanently, and it's not about holding a grudge. It's about knowing that broken trust can rarely be fully rebuilt, especially when it's been shattered during critical moments. My oldest son asked me last month if I regretted reporting David, said I could have just found another job and moved on. I explained that doing the right thing isn't always about us. Sometimes it's about protecting others who don't have the voice or power to protect themselves. Son, I said, justice isn't about personal revenge. It's about making sure bad people don't keep hurting good ones. And I could see in his eyes that he understood the difference. Jennifer and I are planning a trip to Europe next summer, something we always dreamed of but never had the courage to spend money on. Our family is stronger, our finances are secure, and I sleep peacefully every night knowing I made the right choices when it was hardest. David's betrayal taught me that loyalty should go both ways, that integrity matters more than convenience, and that sometimes the best revenge is simply living well and doing good. Today, when I look back, I see that what seemed like an unfair firing was actually the best gift David could have given me, even if that wasn't his intention. It freed me from a corrupt company, brought me to a better role, and gave me the chance to make a real difference in the lives of dozens of people. True justice wasn't David in prison. It was discovering that I had the strength to choose the right path when the wrong one seemed easier. And that choice led me to a life better than I ever imagined. Looking back, I realized that what seemed like an unfair firing was actually the best gift Graham could have given me, even if that wasn't his intention. It freed me from a company that never valued my dedication, led me to a better position at Devlin Systems, and gave me the chance to make a real difference in the lives of dozens of people. The corporate betrayal that felt like the end of my career ended up revealing my true strength, and showed me that sometimes justice arrives in ways we never see coming. And now I want to hear from you. Have you ever gone through something similar at work? Have you ever felt betrayed by a boss or a company after years of loyalty? Share your story in the comments. I'd love to know how you dealt with the injustice and whether you managed to turn things around like I did. If this story touched you in any way, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next stories I'll be sharing here. Every week I bring real accounts from people who faced betrayal, unfair layoffs, family struggles, and still found a way to rise above it all with dignity and wisdom. These are stories of resilience, justice, and fresh starts that just might inspire you in your own life challenges.